Ngozi paced around the small, dimly lit room, her heart pounding like a drum in her chest. Each step seemed to echo the anxiety coursing through her veins. Could Emeka have been in a terrible motor accident? Or worse, kidnapped? She whispered, the terrifying thoughts swirling like a storm through her mind. Her wedding day was just 2 days away, a day she had anticipated and has been preparing for with so much joy and excitement. Yet her fiancé, Emeka, was nowhere to be found. Even worse, his phone was unreachable. The last time she'd heard from him was in the early hours of that day. He had called, his voice warm and reassuring, telling her he was on his way to the park where he would board a bus to the east. Many hours have passed and it's dusk already, yet Emeka was not in sight or any news about his whereabouts known. The wedding preparations were in full swing, decorations were being set, relatives were arriving, but the groom was missing. Memories flooded back to the day Ngozi met Emeka during a brief visit to her sister in Lagos 3 years ago. It was as though fate had brought them together. The relationship blossomed, and in 6 months, they had made deep commitments to each other, deciding to take it to the next level. They had promised to be each other's rock, composing a mantra that always reminded them of their love as it echoed on her ears. Be my love forever, forever, and ever. Emeka was not just a successful businessman, he was a dreamer. He co-owned a startup company specializing in the sales of imported drinks. But shortly after Ngozi met him, his world crumbled. A dispute with his colleague led to his arrest, and he lost everything. She couldn't stand having her beloved in detention, and so she did everything within her means to help him. It was her first month at work, yet she sent all her earnings to Emeka's uncle to secure his release. After his release, Emeka returned to his village, hoping to make a fresh start, but the village hustle didn't favor him. Desperate, he told Ngozi that he wanted to return to Lagos, but lacked the means to do so. Without hesitation, she gave him the transport fare and some money for food that would be able to sustain him for some time. Despite his struggles and downtimes, she loved him for his resilience and determination. She vowed to be his support, believing in a brighter future for them. When he finally made it back to Lagos, Emeka spent months searching for work. Throughout this period, Ngozi supported him from her meager salary, sending him money every 2 weeks. It took him about 6 months to find a job. Upon receiving his first paycheck, he insisted she stop sending him money, although there were times when he visited home and asked her to complete his transport fare, promising to pay her back. But he never did. 2 years down the line, Emeka's finance refused to pick up from where it had crumbled. At one point, another man sought Ngozi's hand in marriage. Emeka, fearing he might lose her, begged her not to leave him. In a moment of desperation, she even tested his resolve by pretending to be pregnant for another man. But Emeka remained unresolved, and his love and commitment shone through. He promised to still marry her and raise the child as his own, making sure no one ever knows the truth. Eventually, Emeka visited Ngozi's mother, pleading with her not to let Ngozi marry another man. His sincerity touched her mother's heart, and she agreed because Ngozi had convinced her that she truly loved Emeka and couldn't bear to hurt him. As their relationship deepened, Emeka planned to pay her dowry in January. However, he couldn't make it home due to his work commitments in Lagos. In April, he visited, and they had their engagement, marking the beginning of their marriage preparations. In September, Emeka sent 40,000 naira to Ngozi to start buying things for their marriage. With it, she purchased drinks for the wedding and clothes for her in-laws. She supported him with an additional 40,000 naira, which she used to buy asoebi clothes for her friends in her wedding attire. Emeka called Ngozi's uncle to set a date for the traditional marriage, and they settled on December 25th. He planned for a modest traditional ceremony, followed by a grand wedding. They also discussed these plans with the uncle, who agreed to the arrangements. Emeka then called the vicar of Amaka's church parish to set the wedding date. Although the vicar was initially reluctant to set a date over the phone, he agreed when Emeka explained that his work engagement in Lagos would not allow him travel down at that moment. Ngozi represented him, and January 6th was fixed for their wedding. The vicar outlined the necessary procedures and requirements for the banns of marriage. Ngozi diligently followed through with the preparations. She obtained the certificate from the church, made notice entry at the local government office, and after 21 days, received another certificate to take back to the church. With the required documents, the banns of marriage were announced in the church 3 times. As the wedding day drew nearer and the wedding banns kept being announced in the church each Sunday, Ngozi felt the weight of their impending nuptials grow heavier. She asked Emeka for more money to start buying food items, especially with the rising prices of essentials like rice and groundnut oil as Christmas approached. But Emeka, always busy with work, kept postponing, assuring her that he would handle those expenses when he got home, regardless of any price hikes. Relieved by his confidence, Ngozi set her worries aside and focused on other preparations. Around late November, Ngozi began to experience strange feelings she couldn't quite place her hands on. A sense of unease gnawed at her. She prayed fervently, asking God for clarity. Seeking comfort, she confided in her sister about the unsettling emotions. Her sister advised her to keep praying and to seek reassurance from Emeka. Ngozi also reached out to Emeka's closest friend, Chika, to ask if Emeka was fully committed to the marriage. Both her sister and Chibuzor reassured her, saying that Emeka had no doubts and was looking forward to their wedding. Their words helped, but a small part of her still felt restless. Despite her worries, Ngozi was overwhelmed by the generosity and support she received from family and friends. She managed to raise 90,000 naira from well-wishers, which she used to support Emeka in covering wedding expenses such as the cake, cooking, wedding accessories, and a significant portion of the video and photo coverage costs. Loved ones ordered her wedding decorations for free, and a dear friend even gifted her a bag of rice. With excitement, she shared these blessings with Emeka, keeping him informed of every contribution. Living in Lagos while their wedding was planned to take place in the east meant that Ngozi bore the brunt of the preparations. Yet she embraced the challenge, driven by her love and the vision of their life together in a short while. She meticulously managed the funds and logistics, ensuring that everything was in place for their big day. As the wedding preparations gained momentum, Ngozi's lovely mom, ever supportive and selfless, decided to give all she had for her daughter's happiness. She went to her bank, withdrew her life savings, went to the market, and bought all the ingredients needed for cooking soups for Swallow, Ofe Egusi, and Ofe Akwu, ensuring that nothing was left out for the wedding ceremony. With the banns of marriage being announced in the church, Emeka requested that Ngozi design the invitation cards and send them to him via waybill. She meticulously crafted the IVs and sent them off. They share the invitations far and wide, covering local government offices, towns, villages, friends, colleagues from work, and fellow students. Emeka also asked Ngozi to take wine and some of the IVs to the parents of the day and the chairman of the occasion. Dutifully, she carried out his request, ensuring every detail was handled with care. Meanwhile, he promised that he would print their wedding banner in Lagos and come down with it for personal touch to their photo booth during the celebration. It was on the 23rd of December, at around 5:10 a.m., Emeka had called Ngozi with the news she had been longing to hear. He was on his way to the bus park to follow the first bus coming to Onitsha. Joy filled Ngozi's heart, knowing that in a few hours she would be reunited with her beloved. She prayed with him over the phone, asking for journey mercies, for God to guide him safely home. She even sought additional prayers from her mother and their pastor, which they did. Emeka promised to call her once he boarded the bus. As the minutes ticked by from 5 a.m. to 7 a.m., worry began to creep into Ngozi's heart. Emeka should have boarded the bus by now, she thought. She dialed his numbers frantically, first his MTN line, then his Airtel line, but both were unreachable. The cold, unfeeling message from the network went thus: "Dear customer, the number you're trying to call is currently switched off. Please try again later." Initially, she thought it was a minor network glitch, a temporary issue that would be fixed soon. But as time dragged on, her anxiety grew. By 3:10 p.m., her worry had turned into panic. Emeka's friend from Lagos called, saying he had been trying to reach Emeka as well, but his lines were still switched off. With tears streaming down her face, Ngozi shared her fears. The friend urged her to stay calm, reassuring her that Emeka would arrive by evening. But as darkness fell and Emeka did not appear, Ngozi's steeze and composure crumbled. She prayed and cried throughout the night, her heart heavy with fear and dread. her fingers dialing his number again and again, to no avail. Desperation clawed at her. She called her mother. "Mommy, my heart! I feel like I'm sinking into an abyss." Her mother prayed with her until morning. At the dawn of daylight, being the 24th, Ngozi, with tears streaking down her face, ventured out to Alka Street, asking passersby if anyone had seen Emeka. She acted like a woman on the brink of madness, searching for any sign of her love. People kept staring at her, shaking their heads saying, "This one done madu," while avoiding any contact with her. Ngozi sat down on the street in utter dismay and called Chika, Emeka's friend. She needed answers, so she kept asking him questions, and some he didn't even know what to answer. Did anyone accompany Emeka to the park? Which bus company did he use? Did he have a chance to charge his phone overnight? She also sent another friend, Daniel, to Emeka's compound with the same questions. They confirmed that there had been electricity throughout the night and that Emeka hadn't mentioned which company he would travel with, only that he would take a bus halfway to Benin and then another from Benin to Onitsha. No one had accompanied him to the park. Ngozi clung to hope, praying for a miracle, yearning and believing for the moment when Emeka would walk through the door, safe and sound, and narrate to her all he had encountered on the journey. On December 25th, the day set for the traditional marriage, Ngozi, with the help of a friend, made her way to her village, clinging to the hope that a miracle might happen. She prayed fervently that Emeka and his family would appear to pay her bride price. But as the hours passed, there was no sign of them, no indication that anything was going as planned. Despair washed over her, and she felt an overwhelming desire to escape from the pain. She even wished for death. Her mind spiraled with countless thoughts. Could Emeka have been in an accident? If so, surely someone would have called to identify him. She scoured Facebook for any news of recent accidents, but found nothing. Could it have been a victim of one chance kidnap? If it were to be one chance, they would have taken everything and left him. He would have called her by now. He knew her number by heart. If it were the kind demanding ransom, surely they would have contacted her with their demands. Then a chilling thought crossed her mind. Rituals. Could it be that he had been taken for ritual purposes? The idea left her paralyzed with fear. Tears streamed down her face as she cried out, "What did I do wrong to deserve this, God? Why did you allow this to happen to me?" She wept bitterly, wishing for an end to her suffering. People gathered around her, trying to console her, but their words felt empty against the enormity of her grief. Her phone rang incessantly, with calls from Emeka's friends in Lagos, his brothers and relatives all desperate for news. They all believed she would be the first person Emeka would contact once he was safe. On December 28th, Ngozi made her way to Emeka's house in the village, her heart heavy with worry. Seeing her, his family grew increasingly concerned. She went to the graves of his parents and wept bitterly, pleading with the spirit of his mother to bring him back home. Emeka's uncle tried to comfort her, assuring her that everything would be all right, even though he knew it was an almost irrational hope. However, there was something spectacular that happened that made her suspect something was fishy. On December 26, she noticed that Emeka's Facebook Messenger showed him as active just 20 minutes earlier. Could this be true? She wondered. The messages she had sent on December 23rd had been delivered and read. This strange activity made her uneasy. She checked his WhatsApp where her messages had been delivered but not read. Compelled by a mix of hope and anxiety, she sent another message, which was delivered and read within 2 days. This confusing pattern left her convinced that Emeka was alive, yet uncertainty still plagued her. She heard whispers from someone in Emeka's compound, claiming that he had packed his bags and gone to another girl's house instead of traveling to the east. Ngozi refused to believe it. He couldn't do that, she thought. A friend who had joined her in prayers shared a similar revelation, but despite everything, she still doubted. On January 8, 2018, Ngozi's heart skipped a beat when she saw a post on Emeka's Facebook wall. It read, "Some people wanted me dead on December 23rd, 2017, but thank God for saving my life. I will tell the story when I am fit." Her relief was short-lived, however, as Emeka did not call her. When she tried to reach him, he either didn't pick up or remained silent when he did. 2 days later, on January 10th, 2018, while browsing Facebook, Ngozi received a friend request from an account named Mighty Uzoma. The profile was new, but the name was unmistakably Emeka's. She accepted the request, hoping for answers. Within minutes, she saw pictures of Emeka holding another girl closely, both dressed in matching outfits. She recognized the cloth immediately. It was the same one Emeka had shown her, praising its style. Heart pounding, Ngozi saved the pictures and uploaded them to Emeka's WhatsApp, confronting him. Emeka's response was cold and final. He told her to move on with her life, assuring her that God would not let her die from this heartbreak. Ngozi was devastated. Her heart felt like it was being torn apart, and she struggled to breathe. But in her darkest moment, she found the strength and courage to forge ahead through her friends and family. Though she developed a heart problem, she eventually healed. She picked up the pieces of her shattered heart and decided to move on. With gratitude, she thanked God for everything. "It is well with my soul" became her daily mantra. Soon, like a bird soaring in the sky, she felt free from all her pains. As March approached, she resolved to march forward with her life. Ngozi became active in the village church where she served as a choir member. It was a cool December morning in Ngozi's hometown, and the small village church was alive with the festive spirit of the season. The choir, dressed in their matching white blouses and deep blue skirts, stood at the front of the altar, their voices soaring in harmony. Ngozi stood out among them, not just for her striking beauty, but for the way she led the choir with such grace and confidence. Her rich alto voice carried the hymn, filling every corner of the church and stirring the hearts of everyone present. Mark sat in the third pew, his eyes fixed on her. He had returned home from the United States to spend Christmas with his mother, and though the village was familiar, everything about this moment felt new. He watched as Ngozi swayed gently to the rhythm, her voice lifting the congregation into worship. Her dark skin glowed under the morning light streaming through the stained glass windows, and her smile, radiant and genuine, seemed to light up the room. Mark couldn't take his eyes off her. Something about her presence was magnetic, pulling him in without effort. When the choir finished their song and the priest began his homily, Mark barely registered the words. His mind was on her, the woman with the angelic voice and an aura that seemed to command the very air around her. After the service, the congregation spilled out of the church, exchanging Christmas greetings and making plans for the upcoming festivities. Ngozi lingered near the choir section, chatting and laughing with some of the other singers. She was still wearing her choir uniform, and her hair was tied back with a black scarf in a simple bun, highlighting her delicate features. Mark hesitated for a moment, unsure if he should approach her. His heart pounded in his chest, and he found himself rehearsing what he would say. Gathering his courage, he walked up to her, his steps deliberate but unhurried. When he reached her, she turned to him, her eyes meeting his. They were deep and kind, holding a hint of curiosity. "Good morning," Mark said, his voice steady despite the nervous energy coursing through him. "I just wanted to say, you're beautiful." Ngozi blinked, a flicker of surprise crossing her face. She wasn't used to such direct compliments, especially not from a stranger. "Thank you," she said softly, her lips curving into a polite smile. "And," Mark continued, his tone warm and sincere, "you sing beautifully. The way you led the choir today, it was incredible. I'm convinced you have a bunch of talent." Ngozi tilted her head slightly, her smile deepening. "That's kind of you to say," she replied. "Singing has always been a part of me. It's my way of worshiping and connecting with God." Mark nodded, captivated by the way she spoke. There was a calm confidence in her voice, a genuineness that made every word she said feel important. "I'd love to know you more," he said after a brief pause, his gaze unwavering. "Can I?" Ngozi studied him for a moment. He was tall, with a strong build and warm brown eyes that seemed to hold a world of stories. His neatly trimmed beard and the way he carried himself spoke of someone who was both confident and grounded. There was something about him, an air of kindness and sincerity, that she found disarming. She finally nodded. Why not? I'm Ngozi, she said, extending her hand. Mark, he replied, taking her hand gently in his. His grip was firm but respectful, and the smile he gave her was genuine, reaching his eyes. From that moment, a conversation began that neither wanted to end. They walked together outside the church, past the little children chasing each other in their Christmas outfits, and the elders discussing the sermon. Mark learned that Ngozi was a school teacher who devoted her weekends to the church and her evenings to helping her younger siblings with their studies. Ngozi, in turn, discovered that Mark was an engineer based in the U.S., but still deeply connected to his roots in Enugu. As they spoke, Mark found himself drawn not just to her beauty, but to her intellect and depth of character. Ngozi, too, was intrigued by his openness and the way he listened intently to everything she said. When Mark asked if he could visit her later that week, she hesitated for a moment before agreeing, her heart racing in a way it hadn't in years. By the time they parted ways that day, the seeds of something extraordinary had been planted. Neither knew just how much their lives were about to change, but both felt a pull, a connection that was impossible to ignore. In the weeks that followed, Mark and Ngozi spent every available moment together. They shared long walks under the starry village skies, laughed over roasted corn from the local vendors, and talked about everything: faith, dreams, family, and life. It was during one of those evenings, as they sat under the ancient udala tree in her family compound, that Mark looked at her and said, Ngozi, I don't think I've ever met anyone like you. You're everything I've ever prayed for and more. Ngozi's cheeks flushed, and for the first time in years, she felt her walls begin to crumble. She smiled shyly, her heart whispering the truth she wasn't ready to say out loud yet. Please marry me and make me the happiest man in the world, Mark said, kneeling down and stretching forth a diamond ring he had gotten from Dot, an expensive jeweler, the previous day. Ngozi's heart skipped a beat, her hands flying to her mouth as tears welled up in her eyes. Her mind flashed back towards her ordeal the previous year. Who would believe that in 1 year, God would turn her story around for good? Overwhelmed with joy, she nodded vigorously, her voice trembling. Yes, I'll marry you, she cried. Mark slid the sparkling diamond onto her finger, stood, and embraced her as the world faded away. By March the following year, the bride price ceremony between Ngozi and Mark was conducted in a grand style. It was the talk of the whole town. Ngozi, dressed in a stunning gold and coral George wrapper, with beads adorning her neck and wrists, sat demurely among her family as Mark and his relatives performed the rites. His love for her was evident in the way his eyes lit up when he handed over the gifts, a combination of envelopes, yams, drinks, and other items from her family's list. The village elders blessed their union, and whispers of admiration rippled through the crowd. Mark, dressed in a well-fitted white caftan with gold embroidery, looked every bit the proud groom as he paid respects to Ngozi's family. His sincerity and devotion left no doubt that she was marrying not just a man, but someone who cherished her deeply. A week later, their wedding ceremony was held at the village church where they first met. The church was adorned with white and green ribbons, flowers, and glowing candles. Ngozi walked down the aisle in a lace wedding gown, her beauty radiant and timeless. Mark stood at the altar, his heart pounding with joy as she approached. Their vows were heartfelt, drawing tears from family and friends. With her papers were processed swiftly, as Mark wasted no time relocating his bride to the United States. By the end of March, Ngozi found herself in a new world, standing in awe of the bright lights and bustling streets of New York City. Yet, with Mark by her side, she knew she was home. Their love had not just crossed borders, it had built a new life filled with hope, promise, and endless possibilities. 7 years later, Ngozi stood in the brightly lit mall in Enugu as they drifted from shoe to shop, picking their desired items. She and her family had come down to Nigeria for the Christmas celebrations that year. She wore a flowing green Ankara gown, its patterns reflecting a rich blend of culture and elegance. Her husband, with a warm smile and calm demeanor, held her hand firmly. He was dressed in a crisp white shirt and well-tailored jeans, exuding effortless sophistication. Their two children, a girl of about 6 and a little boy, perhaps 4, named Kamsi and Kamto, trailed behind, excitedly pointing at a toy store nearby. Ngozi's laughter rang through the air as her daughter tugged her hand, asking for permission to check out the toys. Darling, we'll look at them later, she said, her tone soft yet firm. Her husband, smiling, nodded in agreement and scooped up their son, tossing him playfully in the air. Then it happened. Standing a few feet away near the confectionery aisle was Emeka. His heart nearly stopped when he recognized her. Time seemed to rewind and stand still at once. He was clad in a faded shirt and trousers, his once robust frame now slender and weary-looking. The bags under his eyes hinted at sleepless nights and unspoken regret. His hands trembled as he clutched a loaf of bread he had just picked. His gaze darted between Ngozi and the man beside her, the very picture of everything he once promised her but failed to deliver. Ngozi's smile faltered as her eyes locked with his. She blinked once, unsure if it was truly him. The air seemed to thicken, and the sounds of the bustling mall faded into a dull hum. Her husband noticed the change in her expression. "What's wrong, babe?" he asked, concern lacing his deep voice. "It's nothing," Ngozi replied, shaking her head slightly, but her gaze lingered on Emeka, who now stood frozen like a deer caught in headlights. Gathering every ounce of courage, Emeka took hesitant steps forward. Each step felt like a lifetime, his heart pounding with guilt and shame. When he finally reached her, he lowered his gaze, unable to look her in the eye. "Ngozi," he started, his voice hoarse and barely audible. I'm sorry." Ngozi tilted her head slightly, studying him. His shoulders were slouched, his eyes red and filled with unshed tears. She could see the weight of his remorse, the burden he carried. For a moment, memories of their past flashed through her mind, the heartbreak, the betrayal, the tears she shed. Her husband, sensing the tension, gently stepped aside with the kids, giving them some space. Ngozi took a deep breath, her face softening. "Emeka," she said, her voice steady but tinged with emotion. "How are you?" The simple question broke something in him. Tears welled up in his eyes and his lips quivered. "I'm not fine, Ngozi. I haven't been fine for years. I ruined everything. You didn't deserve what I did to you. Please forgive me." Ngozi remained silent, her expression unreadable. Emeka's hands shook as he tried to explain himself further. She left me. She took everything. My money, my properties. She ran away with another man. I lost everything, Ngozi, and every day I regret what I did to you. There was a pause, heavy and suffocating. Ngozi finally exhaled deeply, her face softening into a mixture of pity and resolution. "Emeka," she said, her voice calm yet firm, "I forgave you a long time ago. Holding on to anger only poisons the soul. But forgiveness doesn't mean I've forgotten." Emeka nodded, tears streaming down his face. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice breaking. "You've turned out so amazing. I can see that you're happy." Ngozi glanced at her husband, who was now laughing with their kids by the toy store. Her lips curved into a soft smile. "Yes, I am," she said simply. "God had better plans for me. My journey wasn't easy, but it led me to the love of my life." Emeka's head hung lower, his shoulders shaking with silent sobs. "I'm glad you're happy, Ngozi. I don't deserve your kindness, but thank you." Ngozi reached out and gently touched his shoulder. "Take care of yourself, Emeka. Life is a teacher. Learn from it." She turned to walk away, her steps graceful and full of purpose. Emeka watched her retreating figure, the love of her life walking up to meet her with a protective arm around her waist. Her laughter soon echoed through the mall again, as light and free as a bird's song. As Emeka stood there, his loaf of bread clutched tightly, he felt a strange mix of pain and gratitude. Though his heart ached with regret, he also felt a glimmer of hope. Perhaps, just perhaps, he too could find a way to rebuild his shattered life. There are many lessons to pick from this story. Kindly share any you learned. I'll be bringing more intriguing and insightful stories your way soon. Please do well to like this video. Click on the subscribe icon and put on your notification bell so that you will be notified whenever I post another impactful story on my channel. Thank you and God bless.